Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and I welcome the opportunity of raising this issue, and it is the issue of financial bonds that were issued by Irish Bank Resolution Corporation in respect of various building developments and housing estates in particular throughout the country. Some of these estates are not now finished, but the difficulty has arisen in that Irish Bank Resolution Corporation, as a result of the emergency legislation here earlier this year, has now been put in special liquidation. And we're now only learning of the impact that this legislation is having on housing estates that have been left unfinished by developers who have gone to the wall. Developers take out financial bonds to ensure housing estates can be finished when they go out of business before the job is actually completed. And many insurance companies issue these financial bonds. All the major companies have been involved in this business, and some of them might have been giving loans to developers, and some of them are also giving underwriting the bonds. And the difficulty is now that the bonds which are issued by IBRC in liquidation are not now being paid out. They're put to the bottom of the list, and this is causing a huge difficulty. Local authorities now face the impossible choice in some cases of leaving estates unfinished or taking money from other services to pay for the cost of finishing roads, footpaths, drainage, sewerage works and street lighting in certain estates. And the Minister would have been aware of this when he was bringing forward the legislation. In County Laois alone, I'm aware of 4 housing estates that are not fully yet finished, and work remains to be done. And in the normal course of events, when the builder is gone, they will call in the financial bond. I cite a practical comparison a few years ago when insurance went into administration. There was one large estate in County Laois called Barrow Vale in the Vale in Great Cullen near the Carlow boundary, and several $100,000 was paid by the administrator on foot of that bond. But we now find, because IBRC is in liquidation, they're saying, get lost to the local authorities, join the bottom of the list of unsecured creditors. And as I've said, there are 4 estates in County Laois: Foxborough Housing Estate in Portlaoise, Graigovern in Ballybritish, an estate called the Village in Ballyline, and I'm sure the Cathaoirleach is aware of that estate, and Ryerknaslaefta in Mountrath. And the bonds issued by IBRC in relation to those estates range from $87,000 to $354,000. Now, the works to complete that mightn't require the full bond. It might require more in some cases, or a fraction of the bond or some of the bond, but they need access to the bond. And Minister, this is happening all over Ireland, and you're aware of this, and the Department of Environment is very much aware of this. And more importantly, you were aware of this when you drafted the legislation this time last year. And for several months your department had drafted the legislation. We know that you had met with KPMG, were on site since November 12 months ago. 1 minute, and yet, and I will say, last December, while this legislation had been drafted and was sitting in your top drawer waiting to be produced earlier this year, you introduced a local property tax, and you knew you were bringing in a local property tax in certain housing estates, that the bond would not be honoured as a result of an action you were going to take by liquidating IBRC in a few short months. You were aware of this and you didn't make it known at the time, and that is causing a further difficulty. Minister, I am asking you to give and to arrange between your department and the Department of Environment to give a list of all the estates that are affected by this on a county-by-county basis, and the amount of bonds that are in issue, and so that we can have a reasonable understanding of the scale of the problem, which I understand your department and the Department of Environment would be aware of, but is now only coming to light at local level. Thank you.
Deputy Minister Michael Noonan, Minister has 4 minutes.
On the 7th of February 2013, the Oireachtas passed the Irish Bank Resolution Corporation Act 2013, appointing joint special liquidators for IBRC with immediate effect to wind up its business and operations. Under the IBRC Act, the special liquidators were obliged to independent value all the assets of IBRC and to engage in a sales process which will maximise the return for its creditors, including the state. The matter of development bonds issued by the bank is one of a number of important issues that they must consider in exercising their statutory duties under the Act. Development bonds have traditionally been required as a condition of planning permission by local authorities. The developer must provide a bond set out as a planning condition, which is then called upon in the event of the developer not completing their development in accordance with the plans and particulars, conditions of planning and relevant codes of regulation. I understand that IBRC had in the past issued such bonds to local authorities in relation to loans outstanding to the institution, and I am advised that there are a number of development bonds in favour of various county councils or local authorities which are in place with IBRC in liquidation. It should be noted that it is likely that any liabilities which may arise in relation to any bonds, guarantees and indemnities under these arrangements will most likely rank as unsecured claims in the special liquidation. However, it must be stressed that these bonds are contingent liabilities and therefore will only be called upon where developers breach planning conditions are not in a position to meet any liability that arises as a result. I am aware of the problems facing local authorities, in particular in relation to unfinished housing estates, as a result of developers not complying with the terms of their planning permissions. Both the special liquidators and officials from my department have recently met with the Department of the Environment, Community and Local Government, local authorities and the Housing Agency in relation to this issue as a matter of concern. While it is likely there will be some level of exposure for local authorities as a result of this issue, the Department has confirmed that they are not yet in a position to confirm what the full extent of the exposure may be. It was agreed that work currently being conducted to confirm the actual level of exposure should be continued. It was also agreed that each local authority should consider if, following a cost-benefit analysis, a claim should be submitted to the special liquidators in order to rank as an unsecured creditor for the purposes of the liquidation. It is understood that the Department of the Environment, Community and Local Government will consider an appropriate response for local authorities who are faced with the problem of unfinished housing estates once the full extent of that exposure is known. Throughout the liquidation process, it has been acknowledged that there are unfortunately unavoidable costs which are associated with the agreement in relation to the promissory notes and the subsequent liquidation of IBRC. The Deputy has identified just one category of possible creditors that may become unsecured creditors through the liquidation process. There are amounts owed by IBRC to a range of creditors, including contractors, trade creditors and other service providers, many of which are unsecured. The proceeds from the disposal of IBRC assets will be used to repay creditors in accordance with the normal Companies Act's priorities, and consequently preferred creditors will be paid first, and then the debt which NAMA will have purchased from the central bank will be paid. If there are proceeds available after repayment in full of the NAMA debt, these proceeds will be applied to the remaining unsecured creditors. The Government is aware of the difficulties the liquidation may cause for unsecured creditors, including the local authorities. However, it is important to remember the overall benefits to the state from eliminating the cost of the annual promissory note. We have reduced the state's cash borrowing requirement by 20 billion over the next 10 years. We have brought the state 1 billion closer to meeting our deficit targets than Anglo Irish Bank and Irish Nationwide have been concerned to history. I would advise any local authority to contact the business management team, IBRC, Grand Parade Dublin 6, directly in respect of any claim that they have established. It must be stressed that these bonds are contingent liabilities and therefore will only be called upon where developers breach planning conditions and are not in a position to meet any liability that should have arise.
Mr. Deputy Fleming, you have 2 minutes for a supplementary.
I understand the bad news the Minister is after giving, which will be no comfort to the people in the housing estates throughout the country, and I would ask the Minister at this stage to ask the liquidator to give and to publish a list or make it available to us of all the estates that are potentially affected by this. The very important point here is these are planning permission conditions granted by an arm of the state, the local authority. And one of the conditions was that there be a bond in place. And we have central government now, by its action, deciding not to honour planning permission conditions and by removing the bond and by saying they can go to the bottom of the unsecured creditors list when everything is transferred to NAMA. Minister, I'm asking you, before the IBRC loan book is transferred to NAMA, to make provisions for these bonds to be honoured. And you've actually given a way of dealing with it yourself. You said you've reduced, you've had savings of €1 billion approximately as a result of their refinancing the promissory note. Well, some of that should be used for these purposes. And if that means whether it comes from the special liquidator or your department, or NAMA, we don't particularly mind, but it's not fair that people in housing estates who are paying the local property tax should be singled out to carry an additional can or an additional burden by not having the pats and footlights or floodlights or public lighting installed in their estates. It's very wrong that an arm of the state would come in here and undermine another arm of the state, the local authorities, by taking action which will prevent them from carrying out the work. The taking in charge of local estates, which is a normal condition of a local authority. And Minister, you would spend months drafting this legislation, and you knew it was a logical follow-on. That wasn't made clear to people at the time. It is now only emerging at this stage, and the choice is going to be very simple for local authorities. The work won't be done unless somebody pays for it, and I'm asking you to come up with the balance of the money required to complete these estates.
Deputy Minister, you have 2 minutes.
Well, again, I'd like to thank the Deputy for bringing this matter to my attention and to the attention of the House. As I said, the liquidation will proceed in accordance with the legislation which was passed by the Houses of the Oireachtas, and the order of creditor preference will be in accordance with what's normal under company law, and unsecured creditors will be considered for any residual resources that are available after the preferred creditors and the NAMA situation has been paid. But again, I'll draw the Deputy's attention to what I said in my reply. Meetings have been taking place between officials in my department and officials in the Department of the Environment and the liquidator. The Department of the Environment are now setting out to establish what is the full liability which will be suffered by local authorities around the country, and when they have established what the full liability might be of all local authorities, then they have authority to come up with a programme to deal with this.